As October comes to an end, the 2026 midterms are now effectively just 1 year away. And in this video, we'll be taking a look at the projected 2026 Senate map based on the latest polling data. We have a ton of new polls from key states such as Michigan, Georgia, and North Carolina, as well as polls showing incredibly close races in Minnesota and New Hampshire, races that Democrats were supposed to dominate. And so we'll begin by getting the solid and some of the likely states out of the way. Solid states are defined by margins of 15 points or more, likely states being margins of 5 to 15. Beginning with the safe red states, we have Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, South Dakota, Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, and South Carolina. For the Democrats, we have Oregon, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Jersey, and Delaware. And we also have 3 likely states for the Democrats that we're not going to go too much into, and those are Illinois, Colorado, and New Mexico. These 3 states are not going to be won by the Democratic candidates by margins of 15 points or more, but they're also not going to be incredibly competitive. It is very likely that Democrats will still come out on top in these 3 states. And so with Republicans at 45, Democrats at 42, we're now left with the 13 most competitive races, all of which we now have polling data for as a result of new polls being released in Maine, Minnesota, and Florida. And so Republicans are coming to this midterm cycle with the 53-seat majority that they won in 2024, and they will have to defend it if President Trump is to maintain that majority for the second half of his presidential term. And so we're going to fill in the remaining states going from least to most competitive. And so starting our list off is Florida, where we have a new poll that shows Ashley Moody defeating Jennifer Jenkins by a margin of 7%. This poll conducted by the Tyson Group earlier this month. In Florida, Republicans lead by 7. Ashley Moody is the new U.S. Senator from the Sunshine State. She was appointed earlier this year to fill the vacancy left by Marco Rubio, who became Secretary of State. And according to the betting markets on Kalshi, Republicans have a 90% chance of holding on to this seat. Florida is no longer a competitive state. Just look at 2024. Republicans won the Senate race by 13 points. In 2022, it was by over 16. Florida will be likely red, and it will give the GOP their 46th seat. Next up in Virginia, Democrats are defending the seat with Mark Warner running for re-election to a 4th term. He leads by 7 points over Republican Glenn Youngkin, and this is a hypothetical poll as Youngkin still has not announced whether or not he is going to run for this seat. This is based on a poll conducted late last year. If Youngkin were to actually jump into the race, this election would instantly get significantly more competitive. Youngkin is the incumbent governor who was elected in 2021. He will be term limited, so he will not be on the ballot next week in the Virginia gubernatorial race, and so Youngkin could actually run for the Senate. It's a real possibility, but he may also be just waiting for the 2028 presidential primary. He has proved himself as a skilled politician that can get elected in a blue state, a state that Joe Biden won by 10%. However, Republicans are now in a better position in the Commonwealth of Virginia after Harris's 5-point margin of victory in 2024. And so Virginia does have the capacity to be significantly more competitive, but for now, with Youngkin out of the race, the state is going to be likely blue. And so those were all of the solid and likely states that will appear on this map. All 11 of the remaining races have a polling average of 5 percentage points or less separating the 2 candidates, which means we're going to have an incredibly competitive midterm cycle with a ton of states in play. And so we're now going to categorize the lean states, races that will be decided by margins of 1 to 5 points. And we'll begin down south in North Carolina, where Tom Tillis is the incumbent Republican. However, he has chosen not to run for re-election after barely being able to win a second term in 2020 by a margin of less than 2 points. And so North Carolina on the entire map is the best opportunity for Democrats to pick up a seat next year. And that is why they're going to nominate Roy Cooper, the state's popular former governor, as their nominee to run against Michael Whatley, the former chair of the RNC, who is the presumptive Republican nominee. He has already received the endorsement of President Trump in the primary. And according to the polling data, Roy Cooper leads Michael Whatley by an average of 5 points. However, this is an incredibly competitive race, and the advantage that Cooper has now is that he does have significantly more name recognition in the state as the state's former governor. Michael Whatley is more of a national figure, and so as time goes on, I do expect this race to get closer and closer as North Carolina voters get to know Whatley better. According to the market odds on Kalshi, this is basically a toss-up with Democrats at a 61% chance of winning, Republicans at 39%. This is going to go down to the wire despite what current polling says, and so North Carolina will be placed into the lean Democratic column, but ultimately it could be significantly more competitive. Moving on up now to Maine, where we have an incredibly contentious race as Susan Collins is likely to seek a 6th term in office. She was first elected in 1996 and is already Maine's longest-serving member of Congress in the state's history, even before she wins a 6th term. And so in 2020, everybody thought Susan Collins would lose, but somehow she came out on top and defeated Sarah Gideon by a whopping 9 points on the same ballot where Joe Biden defeated Trump by almost the exact same margin. And so Susan Collins has historically been incredibly popular in her home state, although her popularity has waned in recent years, and that is why this race is going to be so close. On the Democratic side, we have 2 candidates vying for the nomination. On the establishment side, we have Janet Mills, the incoming governor, who was reelected in 2022 by a double-digit margin. And further to her left, we have Graham Plattner. He has no previous political experience. However, he is the younger, more progressive candidate who has received the endorsement of Bernie Sanders. And according to the betting markets on Kalshi, Janet Mills is the slight favorite, but this is going to be a very close primary. Janet Mills is actually older than Susan Collins, so if they do run Mills, Democrats are not going to be able to make the age argument against the incumbent senator. And according to the polls, Janet Mills leads Susan Collins by 5%. This is as a result of the one poll that we have in the average conducted by a Democrat-funded pollster, and so this poll is going to be skewed in favor of the Governor Mills. However, this race is going to be very close. I wouldn't be surprised if Susan Collins still won, but for now, Democrats do have the slightest advantage. And according to the betting markets on Kalshi, Democrats have a 57% chance of winning. Just like North Carolina, this race is going to go down to the wire. Susan Collins is going to be very difficult to beat, but according to just the data, Maine will be the second lean blue state on our map. Next up, we have Texas, where John Cornyn is seeking re-election to a 5th term. This race is not going to be too competitive. John Cornyn is going to come out on top, and according to the polling average, he leads Colin Allred by nearly 5 points. 4.8% is the polling average. Texas is simply too Republican of a state to ever elect a Democratic senator, at least in the near future. In 2024, Trump won the state by nearly 14 points. Texas is going to be lean red, but the margin ultimately is going to be larger. Coming up now to the Midwest, we have a ton of highly competitive races here, as we normally do, but we're going to get Iowa out of the way first. This race is honestly not too exciting. Joni Ernst is the incumbent Republican, but she is not seeking re-election. She is not popular within the Iowa Republican Party. Instead, it's going to be Ashley Hinson that will be on the top of the ballot. She will likely become the new U.S. Senator from Iowa, but we only have polling data so far for Joni Ernst. Josh Turek is the presumptive Democratic nominee, and so based on the data, Iowa will be lean red, but with a new candidate at the top of the Republican ticket in the state, Republicans will win this seat by more than 5 points. There's no doubt about it. Trump carried Iowa in 2024 by nearly a solid margin. The race in nearby Michigan, though, is significantly more exciting. This is the best opportunity on the map for Republicans to flip a seat next year, and that is because Gary Peters, the incumbent Democrat, is retiring, although he honestly wasn't too popular anyways. He barely won his re-election in 2020. Nobody thought the race would go down to a less than 2-point margin, and so he is not seeking re-election, and instead, it's probably going to be Mallory McMorrow that will be the Democratic nominee. We do have a contested primary, but McMorrow is currently the favorite. On the Republican side, things have consolidated a lot more. Mike Rogers is basically the presumptive nominee. He's already received the endorsement of President Trump, and he was the nominee in 2024 against Alyssa Slotkin, a race he narrowly lost by less than half a percentage point. This was the closest Senate race in the country, and nobody thought that Michigan would be this competitive. It was supposed to be an easy win for Slotkin and the Democrats. And so Mike Rogers is an incredibly strong candidate, and it does show in the polling data as he leads McMorrow by 4 34% on average as of late October. Mike Rogers is currently on track to flip this seat and be reelected back to Congress. The market odds, though, do have Democrats as the favorite. 77% the seat goes blue, 23% it goes red, but 77-23 is still a 1 in 4 chance for Republicans. That is not insignificant at all. Michigan is going to be close, but the current data does favor the GOP. Mike Rogers is currently on track to flip Michigan, and the state will be placed into the lean Republican column. We're now going to finish up the Northeast with New Hampshire. This is an incredibly exciting race as Jeanne Shaheen is finally retiring, and we're now going to have Chris Pappas as the Democratic nominee, and John Sununu will likely be the Republican nominee. John Sununu is a former U.S. Senator from the Granite State, elected in 2002 and defeated by Shaheen in 2008. And John Sununu is, of course, part of the Sununu family. He is the older brother of Chris Sununu and the son of former Governor John H. Sununu, and he is likely to make this race a lot more competitive than it would have been if Scott Brown, a former U.S. Senator from Massachusetts, were the Republican nominee. In the primary, Sununu is going to win, and according to the polling data, Chris Pappas leads Sununu by 3.5 points. If you looked at the data between Pappas and Brown, Democrats were ahead by nearly a double-digit margin. So with Sununu now in the race, he officially announced his candidacy just a few weeks ago, and with him now running, the election in New Hampshire is going to be a lot closer than it otherwise would have been. The betting markets have shown an uptick in Republican odds. They're now at 23%. Democrats are still the favorites here, as the state does generally lean left. But as we've seen with Chris Sununu in the 4 gubernatorial races he won, the state can go red, and Republicans are betting on a surprise in the Granite State. But for now, based on the polling data, New Hampshire will be the 3rd lean blue state on our map. And it's now time to get another one of those Midwestern races out of the way. This time, we're going to take out Ohio with John Husted seeking re-election to a full term. Just like Ashley Moody, he was appointed earlier this year, and his appointment was to fill the vacancy left by Vice President J.D. Vance. And so John Husted is the former lieutenant governor, so he's not just a random appointee. He does know the people of Ohio, and his opponent is going to be Democrat Sherrod Brown, a former U.S. Senator who served 3 terms from 2007 until 2025, when he lost his re-election bid to Bernie Moreno by just under 4 points. It's unlikely that Brown is going to make his way back into the Senate. According to the polling average, John Husted leads by nearly 3 points. 2.8% is the polling average. Sherrod Brown in this race is definitely making it a lot closer than it would have been without him. However, Ohio is now a red state. Sherrod Brown is probably not going to end up on top here. Just look at the results from 2024. Trump wins Ohio by a double-digit margin. And according to the betting markets on Kalshi, Republicans have a 64% chance at holding on to this seat in next year's special election. So Ohio is going to be the 4th lean red state on our map, giving Republicans their 50th seat. Coming on back down, we're now going to finish up the South with Georgia, where Jon Ossoff is fighting for his political career. He was first elected back in 2020 in a runoff election against David Perdue by a narrow 1.2% margin. This time, he will be challenged by Mike Collins, a former trucker and current congressman who has already received the endorsement of President Trump. And according to the polling average, this race just keeps getting closer. In May, Collins trailed Ossoff by 5 points. Today, he's behind by just 2.3. This race is getting more and more competitive, with the most recent poll actually showing a dead heat between the two candidates. And so Jon Ossoff's career is on the line here. Mike Collins could actually flip Georgia. In terms of opportunities to flip seats on the map, Georgia comes second for Republicans only to Michigan. And according to the betting markets on Kalshi, Democrats are the favorites here. They have a 74% chance of winning. But again, 1 in 4 is not insignificant at all. Republicans have a chance here if they give Collins enough resources. But for now, based on the data, Jon Ossoff maintains a slight lead in the polls. His 2.3% will make Georgia lean blue. And so we're now left with the 3 most competitive races, at least based purely on the numbers: Minnesota, Nebraska, and Alaska. It's surprising to see these 3 states at the end. However, ultimately, they're probably not going to be the 3 closest, but based on just the numbers, this is simply where we are right now. And so we're going to begin in Minnesota, where Tina Smith, after a term and a half in the upper chamber, will not seek re-election. Instead, it's going to be Peggy Flanagan, Minnesota's lieutenant governor, that will be the Democratic nominee. On the Republican side, it's likely to be Royce White, the Republican nominee for Amy Klobuchar's seat from 2024. And so Minnesota has gotten closer in recent years. In 2020, Joe Biden won the state by 7 points. In 2024, Kamala Harris won it by just 4. And this is with Tim Walz on the ballot with her. Tim Walz is literally the governor of Minnesota. If he wasn't Harris's running mate, the margin here would have been even lower. And of course, in 2016, we all remember when Hillary Clinton almost lost Minnesota, defeating Trump by just a point and a half. And based on the polling data, Minnesota is incredibly close. Peggy Flanagan leads by 2% against a generic Republican. We don't have any polls that have Royce White in it in a head-to-head, and so this is the best that we have right now, although, of course, we will get more data in the coming months. And according to the odds on Kalshi, the odds have gone up for the GOP. They're now at 17% as Minnesota becomes more and more competitive. And so the state will be lean blue, the final lean blue state on our map. In Alaska, incumbent Republican Dan Sullivan is running for re-election to a third term, and he may or may not be challenged by Mary Peltola, the former congresswoman, who was elected in a special election in 2022, won a full term later that year, and then was voted out of office in 2024. She could also run for the governorship, which is why we aren't sure yet if she is actually going to run for the Senate seat, but she will make an announcement in the coming weeks. And according to the polling data, Dan Sullivan leads Mary Peltola by 1.3%. However, this is due to polls funded mainly by Democratic sponsors. Alaska Survey Research is a left-leaning pollster, and so this race is going to be a lot closer than it would be without Mary Peltola if she does jump into the race. But Dan Sullivan is still the favorite, and the race will be lean red on our map. Ultimately, I do expect him to actually win by an even larger margin. And finally, we have the race in Nebraska. It is weird to see Nebraska last, as Pete Ricketts seeks re-election to a full term. Dan Osborne is his independent challenger. He is not a Democrat. He ran as an independent in 2024 and almost defeated Deb Fischer, losing by less than 7 points. Meanwhile, Pete Ricketts wiped the floor with his Democratic opponent. If Ricketts was running against any Democrat, it would be an easy win for Republicans, but Dan Osborne is a bit of an anomaly. And according to the polling data, we actually have a tie between the two candidates. However, it is important to note that both of the polls were conducted by Democrat-sponsored organizations, and so these numbers will be biased in favor of Osborne. In the end, Pete Ricketts is still going to win this race. It's very unlikely he is going to lose, but based purely on the data, Nebraska is a tie. However, since both polls were Democratic-sponsored, I'm going to give the slight edge to the GOP. Nebraska will be the only tilt state on our map, and it will tilt in favor of the Republicans. And so this is it. 1 year out from the 2026 midterms, this is where the polls have the 2026 Senate elections. Republicans winning 52 seats, Democrats winning 48. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you like this video down below if you enjoyed it. Comment down below which races you're watching. Do you think Republicans can flip Michigan? And do you think Susan Collins will hold on in Maine? Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and make sure you subscribe for more content just like this leading up to the 2026 midterms.